Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that you've been living inside someone else's dream. Not metaphorically, literally. Every opinion you hold, every belief you defend, every conviction that feels authentically yours, imagine discovering that none of it originated in your own mind. The thoughts arrived prepackaged, delivered through a screen, a headline, a conversation you overheard, and you simply accepted them, adopted them, made them your identity. And here's the disturbing part. You never noticed. You never questioned. You felt informed, engaged, even passionate about these ideas. But you never stopped to ask the most fundamental question a conscious being can ask. Is this actually mine? In this video, we will uncover why critical thinking is disappearing, how society is being quietly reshaped into patterns of conformity, and what this means for the future of human consciousness. And stay with me until the end, because the last revelation is not just the most important, it might completely change how you see the world and your own mind. Before we dive deep, if you're passionate about understanding how the human mind works, if you seek truth beyond appearances and wish to awaken your awareness, then make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. Together, we can awaken the lost art of thinking clearly in a world drowning in noise. Because the ideas we explore here might not only open your eyes, but also help you see the hidden patterns shaping society itself. Now imagine that this isn't just happening to you. It's happening to nearly everyone around you. Billions of people walking through life, convinced they're thinking, when in reality, they're merely echoing, reacting, repeating. The machinery of their minds still runs, but it no longer generates original thought. It processes pre-approved narratives. They feel smart because they can articulate these ideas fluently. They feel righteous because their tribe confirms these beliefs. They feel certain because everyone in their bubble agrees. But certainty is not the same as truth. And agreement is not the same as understanding. Here's the paradox that should terrify you. We live in the most information-saturated era in human history, yet we may be producing the least original thought. Our ancestors, who lived in caves and gathered around fires, who had no internet, no libraries, no global communication networks, they had to think. Survival demanded it. Every decision required genuine contemplation because there was no algorithm to consult, no expert to defer to, no crowd to follow. They looked at the stars and wondered. They faced the unknown and created meaning. Their minds were forges of original thought because they had no choice but to think for themselves. But you have access to the accumulated knowledge of human civilization in your pocket. You can, within seconds, access perspectives from every corner of the globe, from every era of history. You should be the wisest generation that ever existed. So why aren't you? Why does confusion multiply despite infinite information? Why do people seem more divided, more reactive, more intellectually fragile than ever before? Why does the crowd feel increasingly like a mob? And why does standing apart feel increasingly like exile? The answer is as simple as it is unsettling. You've stopped thinking because you no longer have to. Thinking is exhausting. It requires energy, courage, and above all, it requires the willingness to be wrong, to sit with uncertainty, to hold contradictions without collapsing into the comfort of easy answers. But modern life is engineered for the opposite. It offers you certainty on demand, instant opinions, pre-made worldviews. All you have to do is choose your tribe, and the tribe will tell you what to think, how to feel, what to fear, and who to hate. And the most seductive part? It will make you feel intelligent while doing so. You scroll through your feed, and within minutes, you've absorbed a dozen opinions on complex issues, politics, science, morality, existence itself, and you feel informed, educated, woke, even. But ask yourself, when was the last time you changed your mind about something fundamental? When was the last time you sat with an idea that made you uncomfortable and genuinely considered that you might be wrong? When was the last time you traced your beliefs back to their origin and asked, did I think this, or was I taught to think this? These questions are dangerous because they reveal an uncomfortable truth. Most of what you call your thoughts are not thoughts at all. They're echoes, reflections, pre-programmed responses to stimuli, carefully designed to trigger them. You believe you're an independent thinker because you can argue your position passionately. But passion is not evidence of thought. It's evidence of attachment, and attachment makes you predictable, controllable, useful. Here's the great question that haunts this entire exploration. What if the disappearance of critical thinking isn't an accident? What if it's the natural consequence of a system that rewards conformity and punishes deviation? What if every institution you trust, education, media, technology, even the social structures that promise community, what if they all benefit from your intellectual surrender? What if the greatest threat to human consciousness isn't ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge? The feeling of being informed while remaining fundamentally, profoundly asleep? And here's the part that should shake you to your core. If you're reading these words and thinking, this doesn't apply to me, I'm different, I think for myself, that certainty, that immediate defensive reaction, that might be the clearest sign that it does. The decay of critical thinking didn't begin with social media or smartphones. It began the moment society decided that comfort was more valuable than truth, that speed was more important than depth, that belonging mattered more than authenticity. These shifts happened quietly, almost invisibly, over decades. And by the time you noticed something was wrong, the transformation was already complete. Consider what education has become. Once, it meant learning how to think, how to question assumptions, how to analyze arguments, how to pursue truth even when it contradicts what you want to believe. But somewhere along the way, education transformed into something else entirely. Learning what to think. Students are no longer taught to be philosophers. They're taught to be repeaters. Memorize the approved answers. Regurgitate them on command. Challenge nothing. Question nothing. The system rewards obedience and punishes curiosity. Original thought becomes dangerous because it disrupts the machine. Philosopher Bertrand Russell saw this coming when he wrote, "Most people would rather die than think. In fact, they do." He wasn't being dramatic. He was diagnosing a fundamental truth about human psychology. Thinking is painful. It requires confronting uncertainty, admitting ignorance, and dismantling beliefs you've built your identity around. It demands intellectual humility, the ability to say, I don't know, or worse, I was wrong. But the modern ego cannot tolerate these admissions. We've been conditioned to equate certainty with intelligence and doubt with weakness. Carl Jung understood this psychological trap deeply. He observed that the crowd has no conscience. It is capable of anything precisely because it thinks of nothing. When you dissolve into the collective, you don't have to carry the burden of individual thought. The group thinks for you. The tribe decides for you. And there's a perverse comfort in this surrender. No more wrestling with difficult questions. No more lonely nights wondering if you're on the right path. The crowd offers certainty, belonging, and the intoxicating feeling of righteousness. All you have to do is stop being yourself. This is the hidden problem. Collective stupidity doesn't spread through force. It spreads through seduction. It promises to relieve you of the exhausting burden of independent thought. It offers community in exchange for conformity. And once you accept that trade, once you outsource your thinking to influencers, experts, or tribal narratives, you begin to disappear. Not physically, spiritually. You become a vessel for ideas that were designed for you, believing they are your own. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this exact phenomenon when he observed that madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. Individual intelligence gets swallowed by collective patterns. Smart people, when absorbed into the herd, begin to think in ways that serve the herd's survival, not truth's survival. They defend positions not because those positions are correct, but because those positions define their identity. To question the group is to risk exile, and humans fear exile more than they fear being wrong. This is why modern discourse has become tribal warfare rather than genuine dialogue. People don't debate to discover truth, they debate to defend territory. Every conversation becomes a battle for dominance rather than a collaborative search for understanding. You can see it everywhere. The moment someone challenges your belief, your nervous system activates as if you're under physical threat. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. Your mind doesn't think, let me consider this perspective. It thinks, how do I destroy this threat? Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound about human freedom. The last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Even when everything external is controlled, you still own your mind. But here's the tragedy. Most people voluntarily surrender this ultimate freedom. They give away their minds not because anyone forces them to, but because independent thought feels too lonely, too uncertain, too dangerous. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer captured this perfectly when he said that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. But notice what this progression reveals. The crowd is always wrong at the beginning. Truth tellers are always persecuted first. Only later, after the pioneers have paid the price, does the collective catch up. Which means, if you're always agreeing with the majority, you're probably not thinking you're following. But here's what most people don't realize. The death of critical thinking doesn't just affect what you believe. It reshapes who you are. It rewires your brain. It alters the very structure of your consciousness. And these changes are happening beneath your awareness, in the silent depths where your sense of self is constructed. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman revealed something disturbing in his research. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts. We have 2 systems of thinking, one fast and intuitive, the other slow and analytical. The fast system helped our ancestors survive. When a shadow moved in the bushes, you didn't stop to analyze whether it was a tiger or the wind. You ran. That instant reaction saved lives. But in the modern world, these same mental shortcuts make you vulnerable to manipulation. Every scroll through social media triggers the fast system. Every headline engineered for outrage bypasses your analytical mind and speaks directly to your emotions, and you react before you think. Corporations, politicians, and media institutions have become masters at exploiting these cognitive biases. They understand that a frightened mind doesn't question, it obeys. An outraged mind doesn't analyze, it attacks. A tribal mind doesn't seek truth, it seeks validation. So they feed you narratives designed to keep you in a constant state of emotional reactivity, fear, anger, moral superiority. These emotions feel powerful, but they're the opposite of power. They're chains. What you call your opinion is often nothing more than an emotional response to carefully engineered stimuli. The algorithm learned what triggers you, what enrages you, what makes you click, share, and engage. And every time you react, you train it further. You become more predictable, more controllable. The system doesn't need to force you to think a certain way. It just needs to create an environment where certain thoughts feel natural and others feel forbidden. This is how collective stupidity sustains itself. Not through censorship, but through overstimulation. Your attention is fragmented into thousands of pieces. You scroll past a political scandal, a celebrity drama, a global crisis, a cute cat video, an existential threat, all in the span of 3 minutes. Your brain can't process depth when it's drowning in surface. Neuroscientist Manfred Spitzer calls this digital dementia, the erosion of our capacity for deep focus, critical analysis, and long-term memory. The very foundations of wisdom are being dissolved by constant stimulation. And here's the terrifying part. You can feel informed while knowing nothing. You've seen the headlines. You've absorbed the talking points. You can articulate opinions on complex geopolitical situations, scientific controversies, and philosophical debates. But if someone asked you to explain the reasoning behind your position, to trace the logic from premise to conclusion, to acknowledge the strongest counterarguments, could you? Or would you just repeat what you heard someone else say? This illusion of knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance because it closes the door to learning. A person who knows they're ignorant seeks wisdom. But a person who feels informed while remaining ignorant, they've already stopped searching. They've mistaken the map for the territory. They've confused information consumption with understanding. And in that confusion, critical thinking dies quietly, unnoticed, like a candle burning out in a room no one enters anymore. The consequences extend beyond the individual. When entire societies lose the ability to think critically, history shows us what follows. Hannah Arendt studied the rise of totalitarianism and discovered something chilling. Most evil is done by people who never decided to be good or evil. They simply obeyed. They followed orders. They conformed to the dominant narrative because questioning felt dangerous, lonely, or unnecessary. The banality of evil, she called it. Not monsters creating horror, but ordinary people who stop thinking. You're living through a version of this right now. Look at how quickly people divide into tribes, how readily they demonize those who disagree, how confidently they speak about topics they barely understand, how willing they are to destroy someone's reputation, career, or life over a single statement that violates tribal orthodoxy. None of this requires evil intent. It just requires the absence of critical thought. The moment you stop questioning your own righteousness, you become capable of cruelty in the name of justice. But what if there's a way out? What if the prison you're trapped in has always been unlocked, and you simply never thought to push the door? The rebellion against collective stupidity doesn't begin with arguments or activism. It begins with something far more radical: silence. In a world of constant noise, silence becomes an act of defiance. Turn off the screens. Step away from the feeds. Sit alone with nothing but your own thoughts. At first, it will feel unbearable. Your mind will race. Anxiety will surface. You'll feel the urge to reach for your phone, to fill the void with something, anything. But resist, because in that discomfort lies your liberation. Modern philosopher Alan Watts said, "No one is more dangerous than the man who has looked within himself." Why? Because a person who knows their own mind cannot be easily controlled. They've seen past the illusions. They've reclaimed their inner authority. The second step is to question everything, especially what you already agree with. This is the hardest part, because our natural tendency is to doubt what contradicts us and accept what confirms us. But truth doesn't care about your comfort. It hides in the places you're afraid to look. Whenever you feel an immediate emotional reaction, anger, fear, pride, outrage, pause. Don't react. Observe. Ask yourself, who benefits from me feeling this way? What am I not being shown? What perspective am I missing? Socrates spent his life asking questions that dismantled comfortable illusions. He was executed for it, accused of corrupting the youth. But what was his real crime? He taught people to think. He showed them that certainty is often ignorance wearing a mask. The world has always feared the thinker, because the thinker cannot be controlled by narratives, cannot be herded by emotion, cannot be satisfied with shallow answers. History remembers Socrates long after it forgot the mob that killed him. Third, seek depth instead of speed. Read entire books, not just summaries or social media posts. Listen to people who challenge your worldview with genuine curiosity, not defensiveness. Engage with the strongest versions of opposing arguments, not the weakest strawmen. Every time you defend your belief against well-reasoned opposition, you sharpen your intellect. Every time you admit, "I was wrong," you purify your mind. Growth demands humility. Certainty is the enemy of wisdom. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson discovered that the brain physically changes when we practice mindfulness and deep reflection. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, self-awareness, and impulse control, becomes more active and developed. This means critical thinking isn't just a mental attitude. It's a neurological practice. The more you engage in conscious reflection, the stronger your capacity for independent thought becomes. Your brain is plastic. It can be rewired, but only if you do the work. Fourth, detach from the herd. You cannot see the pattern while you're standing inside it. Step back. Observe trends, ideologies, and collective movements with the eyes of an outsider. Ask, why is everyone suddenly thinking the same way? What narratives are being amplified? And which ones are being suppressed? What emotions are being triggered? And why? The majority isn't always wrong, but they're rarely conscious. True thinkers walk ahead of their time, often misunderstood, often alone, but always awake. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote that the last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Even when everything around you pushes conformity, you still own your mind. No institution, no algorithm, no social pressure can take that from you unless you surrender it willingly. And that's the secret they don't want you to know. Your consciousness is sovereign. The moment you reclaim it, the entire game changes. Now we arrive at the deepest truth, the one that changes everything. The disappearance of critical thinking is not an accident. It is not a random cultural shift or an unfortunate side effect of technological progress. It is a test, perhaps the greatest spiritual test humanity has ever faced. And here's what makes it so profound. This test doesn't come from external forces trying to oppress you. It comes from within, from your own willingness to think, or your willingness to surrender that burden to someone else. Every generation faces its defining challenge, a crucible that determines whether consciousness evolves or regresses. For your ancestors, it might have been surviving famine, war, or plague, physical threats that demanded physical courage. But your challenge is different. You live in relative comfort and safety. Your survival isn't threatened by predators or starvation. So the universe has given you a different trial. Can you remain conscious in a world designed to make you unconscious? Can you think clearly in an age of infinite distraction? Can you stand alone when the entire world rewards conformity? This is not a battle of information versus ignorance. It's a battle between awareness and automation, between presence and programming, between being a conscious human and becoming a sophisticated machine that processes inputs and generates predictable outputs. And here's the revelation that should shake you to your core. Most people have already lost this battle without ever knowing they were in it. But you're still here, still reading, still questioning. That means something. It means some part of you, perhaps the deepest, most authentic part, refuses to surrender, refuses to become just another node in the collective sleep. And that refusal, that stubborn insistence on remaining awake, is the most powerful force in the universe. It's what philosophers call being, not doing, not achieving. Simply being fully present, fully conscious, fully yourself. Philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti taught that to transform the world, we must begin with ourselves. You cannot force others to think. You cannot argue someone into consciousness. You cannot shame people into awakening. But you can think for yourself. You can refuse to echo. You can choose awareness over comfort. And that choice, your choice, ripples outward in ways you cannot see. Every awakened mind becomes a light in the darkness, a signal to others that freedom is still possible. Consider what actually happens when you reclaim your ability to think critically. You don't just gain knowledge. You undergo a fundamental shift in how you perceive reality itself. You begin to see the patterns beneath the chaos, the agendas behind the narratives, the fear driving the outrage, the emptiness behind the noise. You realize that most of what passes for news is manipulation. Most of what passes for debate is theater. Most of what passes for thought is merely conditioned reflex. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It's like discovering that you've been watching a movie your entire life and mistaking it for reality. The characters, the drama, the conflicts, all of it scripted, all of it designed to keep you engaged but never truly awake. And the moment you step out of the theater and into the sunlight, everything changes. The old arguments that once consumed you now seem absurd. The tribal warfare that once felt urgent now reveals itself as distraction. The certainty you once clung to now feels like a prison you've escaped. This is what the great spiritual traditions have always pointed toward. The Buddhists call it enlightenment, the end of illusion. The Greeks called it wisdom, seeing reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. The mystics called it awakening, the return to consciousness after a long sleep. Different words, same truth. There is a way of being human that transcends the mechanical, the reactive, the programmed, and that way begins with thinking. But here's the paradox at the heart of everything. True thinking leads beyond thought itself. When you think deeply enough, when you question thoroughly enough, you eventually arrive at silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of understanding. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of clarity. You realize that the deepest truths cannot be spoken, they can only be lived. You understand that wisdom is not about accumulating more beliefs, but about releasing the false ones, about seeing what is, rather than defending what should be. Einstein understood this when he said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant." We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Critical thinking is not just logic. It's the marriage of reason and intuition, analysis and insight, mind and soul. When these unite, you don't just understand the world differently, you experience it differently. You move through life with a clarity that others mistake for magic, but is simply the natural state of an awakened consciousness. And here's the final truth, the one that makes everything else meaningful. The rise of collective stupidity is not inevitable. It's a choice, the sum of billions of individual decisions to stop questioning, to stop thinking, to stop being. But it can also end with a choice, your choice. The moment you decide to think again, to question again, to be fully present in your own life, you break the spell, not just for yourself, but for everyone your life touches. Because consciousness is contagious. When you refuse to echo, others notice. When you speak truth instead of repeating comfortable lies, something shifts in the room. When you remain calm while the crowd panics, centered while chaos swirls, thoughtful while others react, you become living proof that another way is possible. You become evidence that the prison door was never locked. That freedom was always available. That waking up is as simple and as difficult as choosing to open your eyes. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Think. Not tomorrow. Not after you've read 10 more books or watched 100 more videos. Right now. Look at your life, your beliefs, your certainties, your tribal affiliations. Ask yourself the hardest question a human can ask. What if I'm wrong? Not about this or that particular issue, but about everything. What if the entire framework through which you see reality is distorted? What if you've been living in someone else's dream? That question, that terrifying, liberating question, is where consciousness begins. And once it begins, it cannot be stopped. You will stumble. You will doubt. You will face moments of crushing uncertainty when the old certainties crumble and the new clarity hasn't yet emerged. But that darkness, that's not the end. That's the birth. That's the moment when you stop being a reaction and become a presence. When you stop echoing and start creating. When you stop following and start being. The world doesn't need more followers. It doesn't need more people repeating approved narratives or defending tribal positions. It needs thinkers, questioners, people brave enough to stand in the fire of uncertainty and say, I will look for myself. I will think for myself. I will be myself, even if it costs me everything. Because in the end, what's the alternative? To live your entire life as a sophisticated echo? To reach the end and realize you never actually existed, you were just a collection of borrowed ideas wearing a human face? No, you're better than that. Deeper than that. More real than that. And somewhere beneath all the noise, beneath all the programming, beneath all the fear and conformity, you know it. That's why you're still here. That's why something in you refuses to surrender. Honor that. Protect it. Let it grow. Because that small flame of consciousness, that stubborn refusal to stop thinking, that might be the most important thing in the universe right now. The rise of collective stupidity is not the end of human intelligence. It's the test of it. And you get to decide, every single moment of every single day, which side you're on. Not through grand gestures or public declarations, but through the simple, sacred act of thinking for yourself, of being present, of refusing to sleep while the world dreams. So, the next time you're told what to believe, pause. The next time the crowd demands your outrage, observe. The next time fear whispers in your ear, ask who placed it there. That's how the rebellion begins. Not with weapons or protests, but with awareness. With one person, then another, choosing consciousness over comfort. Choosing truth over belonging. Choosing to be awake in a world that profits from sleep. And perhaps, if enough of us make that choice, future generations will look back at this moment not as the era when thinking died, but as the time when consciousness began its greatest awakening. The choice is yours. It always has been. What will you do with it?